Hello everybody, thank you very much for tuning in today. I've got an amazing founder, Steve, from Offchain Labs, Arbitrum, original builders of Arbitrum. Good to have you here, Steve.
Great to be here.
Thanks for joining our event today, and look forward to diving deeper on your origin story of this amazing initiative.
Likewise, yeah, great to be here.
So tell me about the era that you were just getting started with Offchain Labs, maybe even before you had the name Arbitrum.
So actually, the interesting thing is the name Arbitrum actually predates my involvement in the project, interestingly enough. So if you go on YouTube and you look for the initial mention of the word Arbitrum, you'll find a video from a Princeton 2014 class seminar, fall 2014. And this was a project where my co-founder, Ed Felton, who was a professor in the group at Princeton, led, as part of the seminar, a group of undergrads in this project. And the idea was to scale blockchains and scale them in a way that they'd be able to meet the demand or meet what we believe to be the increasing demand. And the reason why I like to mention the time of fall 2014, that actually predates Ethereum's launch. Ethereum launched in July of 2015. So this was very academic, in the most literal sense at the time. There was no smart contract platform, but Ed was already interested in scaling that platform. Ed went off to the White House for 2 years and was a senior advisor to President Obama and deputy CTO of the White House for the last 2 years of his administration. When he came back, that's when I, and together with my co-founder, Harry Kolodner, or then PhD student Harry Kolodner, but later co-founder, knocked on Ed's door and said, hey Ed, that Arbitrum thing that you worked on a little bit a couple years ago, we think we should dust that off, take it off the shelf, and see if we could actually build this up in a more robust way. And that's what we did in academic context for the next 2 years. We built this up and we wrote an academic paper and published it in Usenet Security, which is a leading security venue. That was in August of 2018, and that's also when we founded the company. And so here we are just over 5 years later, and we've been building Arbitrum in production, trying to build a production from the company then. We succeeded in actually launching it into production in August of 2021, and that's already over 2 years ago. And we're realizing now that we have more work ahead than ever, and our work is just beginning.
Yeah, so there's that 4 year of incubation and primarily academic work before the Offchain Labs company comes in as the vehicle to execute from. How are you involved in those 4 years?
So I primarily got involved in 2017. That's when the project was dormant and I said, let's build out Arbitrum. That was a time where, if you recall, we thought ETH needed to be scaled. This was the CryptoKitties era where we saw some spikes in ETH usage, some spike in gas fees. If you look back, those are little blips compared to the, what we've seen more recently. But it was clear that we needed to scale and that the infrastructure we had wasn't going to do that. So I became very involved. This was, I had several academic projects. So this is one of my main academic projects for my last, 2 years or so at Princeton as a graduate student. And then, we went ahead and we launched the company. Initially, we started off slow. We didn't raise funding. Was sort of, everyone did something else. I was at Princeton and doing a postdoc afterwards as well. And Ed was at Princeton. And then we raised funding. We all left our day jobs and we said, okay, we should build this. But interestingly, because it started at Princeton, and this is a funny, quirk, even though we were the ones that built it, we didn't actually technically own the technology that we built as it works. We did it as we worked in Princeton, and Princeton University owned it. So we actually, one of the first things we did at a company, one of the first deals we signed, or actually the very first deal we signed, was licensing the technology that we built from Princeton University. And then, of course, today we've built well past those initial designs, but that was the starting point of everything.
Yeah, this is a very interesting point to think about, the academic innovation and then the drive to turn it into a patent that can later be commercialized. And then most universities dislike around selling it, but forcing the companies to actually license it. Have you thought about a reform around university IP or technology commercialization around this?
Yeah, so actually very interesting because you mentioned patent, and typically university offices in most industries, this makes sense, is they encourage you when you sort of disclose, hey, we built this cool thing as technologists working at the university, they'll encourage you to pursue a patent on it. And that's initially what happened actually, which we had a patent application and then we licensed it from Princeton. But pretty early on, we realized that, hey, this patent, we don't really want this patent. It's, again, we didn't feel like it was really aligned with the ethos of the ecosystem, of the Ethereum ecosystem. We wanted to be open and non-patent, but again, it wasn't our decision. And we had to actually convince Princeton University that we thought it was in everyone's best interest, which we did, and the interest in the adoption and overall usage of the protocol to drop the patent application. So ultimately, actually, Princeton did get on board with that. We dropped the patent application, but that's like very, very unusual. But I think it shows that Princeton could be thoughtful and really early in understanding, well, maybe a patent makes sense in certain industries, but in this industry, it would actually, ironically, hinder adoption and deter adoption of the protocol, and Princeton actually got on board. But it was actually an early risk, because it's very possible that had we had a patent, the development of layer 2s generally would have looked very, very different, and both the adoption and also the proliferation of the technology. So that's something which we had to make the case. It was an unfamiliar case to a university patent office, but they were very receptive and really forward thinking.
So what was it that you were licensing from Princeton?
We published an academic paper with the core ideas of how to build a roll-up with an interactive fraud proof. Again, the word roll-up didn't exist yet, actually. Like today, that's part of the vocabulary in this space, but it didn't exist yet. We built Arbitrum, which, looking back, was a roll-up with interactive fraud proofs. And today, that's like agreed upon. That's the way to build an optimistic roll-up. So us and all of our competitors building optimistic roll-ups are building a form of that technology that we had then. And that's what we initially licensed from Princeton University, the ability to do that. Again, initially there was a patent. That patent was dropped, but that's all sort of happened as part of that process.
I see.
There was a patent application, I should say.
Mm-hmm. What I don't quite follow is, if the patent never got completed, what is it that you were licensing if the patent wasn't completed?
The core technology was built by Princeton, and
so they had IP rights of
IP rights
sort.
to
Did
that,
not
and
have to mature into a patent.
It's their choice of whether they wanted to mature into a patent, how they wanted to defend that over time, and that was something which was involved in the conversation. But the licensing agreement happened before any patent was finalized. So that all happened post-licensing, actually. The dropping of the patent was post-licensing the IP, because again, the IP was developed in Princeton University time, and ultimately it was their decision. And we helped guide them to what we believed was the correct choice for everyone involved. But ultimately it was their decision, just as the owners of the IP, how they want to pursue that.
Yeah, I wanted to dig in a little bit around that, because it seems like an existential challenge, where coming out of a university where you had the most time to think about the foundations of cryptography and scaling the foundational technology, if the IP rights were a bottleneck to being compatible with open source, Arbitrum as a product may not be where it is today. So we really see that it's commendable. You figured out the way to take the intellectual property rights that universities can be very protective about, and made it compatible with the open source, plug in anytime you want, free to participate world that we have in Web3.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something which was important to us, to not pursue a patent. And again, even if you look at like I said today, not even us and our competitors, like many people are building and using the technology that would have been patented. And I think it would have, assuming that this would have been enforced, and I again, wouldn't have been us enforcing it, but assuming that, say, the university would have chosen to do that, it could have definitely dramatically changed the landscape of layer 2 technology. So early on, we did it because we felt that was the right thing to do from, what we believed was correct. I didn't really talk about my personal history, but I spent my career, my academic career before Arbitrum, building open source, freely available technologies. So a lot of my academic work was around MPC, or multi-party computation, building protocols, the first protocols that could securely distribute signing for Ethereum or Bitcoin signatures. And a few companies went and commercialized that. For example, Fireblocks, a company that went and commercialized some of my academic work, as well as Binance, as well as a company called Curve, which was an early competitor to Fireblocks. It was acquired by PayPal. And we were always interested in building open technology that's usable and can proliferate. That was just the values that we had, but also very pragmatically, I think it could have also changed the adoption, and we are very fortunate that Princeton University ultimately was able to see that and go down that route.
Did you have any other legal challenges that you think are good examples of how to handle a variety of challenges that Web3 projects may face, that other founders could learn from?
And nothing specific to us. I think as an industry, we're hoping for greater regulatory clarity on certain points that will help bring more adoption into the industry as a whole. But we've been very fortunate to, I think, be doing things that are very clearly open and decentralized, and I think that's always important to us, but obviously more regulatory clarity is always important, but nothing too specific to us.
How did you think about finding the right team and talent and retaining it?
So I was super fortunate that my two co-founders, so Harry, who was the PhD student at Princeton, and Ed, who was our professor in our group, not our advisor, but a professor in our group, were the founding team. And that's about as strong as a founding team as you can imagine, incredibly strong. Certainly technically, we built up some of the non-technical skills along the way, but technically, super strong team, the likes of which, it's hard to really find, certainly in a small company. And we built from that core. We built it relatively slowly. For example, fast forward, remember 2 years later, or even 3 years later, in August of 21, when we launched the initial network into production for users, I think we were about 12 people at the time. So we kept it very small and really innovated in a small group, and we built slowly. Again, we added several people, several amazing engineers, business leads, et cetera, to that over time. But we always, the philosophy we had for developing our team was always one out of need, right? So we didn't build a marketing team before we had a product to market. We didn't build a partnership team before there actually had technology that people wanted to partner with us and use. And I think that was very valuable for us because we were always meeting the need that we had rather than trying to sort of market something that didn't yet exist and then creating hype and then trying to backfill technology. So we were always starting with the technology and taking that to where it came for us and then building the support teams around that. Hey, we built cool technology, people want to use it, people want to partner, people want to market it. We have to build a team, we have to build out these other organizations, but that was always, again, directed from the core technology.
Do you think there was anything that you and your team did particularly well that most Web3 companies may fail at?
One thing which we did, which now is I think standard for teams that are launching chains and rollups, but was actually not so standard at the time, we did something called a fair launch, which meant when Arbitrum initially launched, it didn't pick favorites and say, hey, you get to roll out first, this app goes first, we're going to prioritize the best apps or the most likely to succeed. We said we're going to roll out the for everyone. So actually, I mentioned August of 21 when the chain was launched to the public, but if you go back a few months, May of 2021 was when we opened the chain to developers. And we said, hey, we have this chain, developers come in, and we were very fair and far and wide to who was able to come in as long as they were legitimately building a project. Didn't matter if we agreed, thought the project was going to succeed or not. That wasn't part of the test. It was you can build. And the idea is, once you open the door for users, there should be things for them to do and applications that are already built. And others didn't take this strategy and said, hey, we're going to prioritize the leading applications on Ethereum. They'll get the red carpet rolled out. They'll be able to build out first. The problem is you can look backwards and see who succeeded. It's very, very hard to look forward and see who will succeed. And sure, some of the dominant parties or players in Ethereum layer 1 might be well positioned to succeed, but they'll succeed whether or not you roll out the red carpet for them. So our goal was to just be fair and open and to everyone and do a fair launch that doesn't prioritize. And in doing that, we helped a lot of projects out. Many of them ultimately failed, and we don't hear about them again today. And many of them succeeded in ways in which we were trying to pick the previous winners. We wouldn't have known. And one great example is GMX. GMX is a project that started off with very humble origins in Arbitrum. They didn't have a large team. They didn't really have traction yet, but we didn't prioritize. If I was guessing, would GMX be one of the most successful DeFi projects, which it is today, I probably wouldn't have had a reason to know that would happen. But our philosophy was we should be open and collaborative and work with everyone and support everyone. And I think that defined both our initial launch, but also the values that permeate the network today. It's one that's open and collaborative and welcoming. And you see this, even today in Arbitrum governance, in the way that's decentralized and well past the initial beginnings of Arbitrum. It's extremely collaborative environment that works together, and the community itself is deeply bought in and leads initiatives in a way that I think in many ways comes from those initial values that the ecosystem began with.
So the fair launch, enabling anybody to build at the same time instead of this red carpet idea, is a response to the question of how do we get this multi-jump to our layer 2. And I think the counter response was, if we get the biggest players in first, there will be that much more incentive for the later comers. At that time, what gave you the conviction that the fair, everybody at the same time, was worthy enough of a value proposition for multiple parties to make the jump instead of seeding it up front?
Yeah, it's a great point. It wasn't obvious which would be a better business one, but what was obvious to us was from a values perspective. And that's, I think, the core thing here. Just follow what you think is the right thing and the correct thing from values. And what are the values I mean? The values are decentralization, right? The entire point of this technology is to build decentralized infrastructure which there are no centralized actors and gatekeepers that are stopping people just because they don't have the right connections to do that. And that was critical to the values of what we're building, right up there with security, which is another thing, which is one of the critical values that we weren't going to compromise on. So it wasn't necessarily clear to us that this is, in retrospect, sure, it looks like it was the right move from a business perspective as well. But then it was clear that If we're just taking one set of centralized actors and replacing it with another, we might make some people very happy, that new set of centralized actors, but that's not the foundational and fundamentally transformative thing we're trying to do. We're trying to remove the centralization, and how more so than, can you do that by removing the barrier and not just creating another barrier to entry. So it really stemmed from what we believed was the correct thing for the technology and what we were trying to accomplish from a values perspective, and the benefits that we saw from an ecosystem BD perspective, I think were just sort of some free brownie points we got.
Great. So I want to wrap it up with your sense of vision of what does Arbitrum and maybe Offchain Labs, if you anticipate anything else coming out of it other than Arbitrum, look like in 4 or 5 years, past the next cycle? How is it being utilized? What are the new set of features that have become available? And who are the groups of customers or clusters of users that are really happy about its existence and are deeply wedded into it?
So I can tell you what we're building to sort of make that future happen.
Yeah.
And one of the things is I work on the infrastructure layer of the stack. So if you go back in time, go back a few years, would I have been able to tell you that like DeFi and NFTs became what they became? No, I couldn't have guessed that. And will I be able to tell you going forward in a year or two from now what the big new verticals that will emerge are? Absolutely not. But what I can tell you is from an infrastructure builder's perspective, we know what people want. And it doesn't matter what vertical you're building, if you're NFT, if you're gaming, if you're real world asset, everyone says we want lower fees. Mm-hmm. No one ever says, hey, these fees are too low. Can you make them a little bit higher for me? Like that never happens. And we want faster execution. No one says, guys, slow this down a little bit. This is too fast. Like that doesn't happen. And we also want high security. And those are 3 core tenets of what we're building. And then the thing that we have to add on top of all those are the things we can't compromise, is good user experience and good developer experience. So one thing that we're building at Offchain Labs, which will be available to the Arbitrum public chains should they choose to build it, but also available to, say, Arbitrum Orbit chains, which are other chains in the Arbitrum ecosystem, is a project called Arbitrum Stylus. And this gives developers the ability to build smart contracts in other languages alongside Solidity, composable, fully proven, fraud-proven onto Ethereum by the Arbitrum fraud prover. And these languages initially are Rust and C and C++. An interesting stat is they're estimated to be a few tens of thousands of Solidity developers, about 3 million Rust developers, about 12 million C++ developers. And the core that we're trying to do here by building Stylus is saying, hey, how can we expand the pie? How can we talk to these millions of developers that, if you're in the bubble, everything looks like we have everyone today. But if you zoom out, it's like, no, there's just most of the world's developers actually develop in other languages. It's not only the developers, it's also the code that they've written over years, the libraries that they've built over many years. This includes advanced cryptographic libraries, machine learning, AI libraries. And so it's the developers, the human talent, also the tools that they've built and the experience that they can build, the applications that you can build, because also Arbitrum Stylus reduces cost by about 10 to 100x for computation. So we're constantly saying, how can we make affordances to bring in new developers, existing libraries, and new applications possible? And that's where our core focus is at Offchain Labs, to build the hooks to make new innovation possible. And what we know is we're putting technology out there that will make completely new applications possible. And I think that's what we're going to see people use this and build up completely new verticals. So I cannot guess today what those verticals will be. We see a bunch emerging already, but what we know is that there's a lot of possibility with the technology we're building.
Whatever the use cases and the utilization may be, the key drivers will be still the same: lower transaction cost, finality, programmability. I just wanted to kind of have you state that the way you see it.
Yeah, so I believe that the key drivers are going to be decentralization, increasingly important over time. We've seen just in the past year some of the risks of decentralization in our ecosystem, in our industry, how the industry is perceived outside. So focus on decentralization is important. Right up there together with that is a focus on security. And then comes the pragmatic, okay, what can we do with this technology? What can we build? What are the limitations? And today, there are limitations in terms of scalability, in terms of developer tools. We're doing a lot to solve scalability, and now we're doing a lot to solve developer tooling and user tooling to make the experience fast for users, welcome for users, to make welcome developers who might build in other languages, and allow them to bring in their libraries that they built, allow them to talk directly to the software stacks they already have. I think this becomes extremely important as you go to mainstream adoption, because there's every company out there today, every enterprise, big enterprise is looking and saying, hey, we want to do something in the Web3 space. But the next question they're going to have is, what are the resources we have, and how can we repurpose those? So the core point here, and this actually is something which you look back to the launch of Arbitrum, another thing Arbitrum did differently when no one else was doing it was EVM compatibility. if you look back 3 years ago, every other rollup was either had their own custom compiler, their own custom language. They weren't trying to get smart contracts. Arbitrum, we at Offchain Labs were the first to build something that's, hey, it's EVM compatible. And that was, I think, a big driver of the success because it was just easy to use for the EVM developers. Now we want to do that again and say, okay, we're keeping that. That's like the floor, but it's not the ceiling. Can we build even more of that? Can we make something that's easier to use, not only for the EVM developers? They'll be there and they'll have their tools and those aren't going anywhere, but it's easier to use for the rest of the world's developers as well. I think that's going to drive tremendous innovation.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Bye for now.